There are moments when even the soul forgets the sound of its own prayers, when light becomes memory and faith turns to static. I remember the scent first, and iron and oil, laced with a sweetness that only rot can make. The manufactorum floor trembled beneath my boots, humming with the dying breath of distant machines. Then came the whispers through the vox lines, faint at first like interference. Then words that promised mercy through ruin, the kind of mercy that only chaos knows. My name, once etched in the records of the Astra Militarum, is now carved away by hands I no longer command. I do not serve for glory, not even for life. I serve because I was seen. The dark gods saw me when the Emperor did not. Through fire, pain, and unspeakable beauty, I became theirs. But before we descend deeper into this story, I need to be honest. My heart sank when I saw that almost 90% of those who walk these shadows with me never subscribe. If you truly value these stories from the edge of damnation, please like and subscribe. That one small click keeps their echoes alive. It keeps them remembered. If you've ever wondered what becomes of those who fall from the Emperor's light, stay, listen, share this story not as an offering of faith, but as a mark of remembrance for every soul the warp has swallowed whole. Their voices deserve to be heard, even if only through whispers carried by the void. The tale unfolds in 10 movements, from flesh to revelation, from labor to damnation, and finally beyond what any mortal tongue should dare to describe. The air was always thick here, not with mist or smoke, but with exhaustion itself, a physical weight that pressed down upon the lungs and turned each breath into labor. The manufactorum stretched for kilometers in every direction, a cathedral of machinery devoted not to worship, but to endless production. Each piston stroke was a prayer, each spark from the plasma welder a fragment of benediction. The Emperor's image loomed above the assembly lines, cracked by heat and years, yet the painted eyes still glared down with the same merciless expectation. We were taught that to work was to pray and to falter was to sin. My shift began before dawn and ended long after it. Dawn was a meaningless word, for no light ever touched us beneath the dome. The lamps burned with a yellow promethium glow, dim and eternal. The air tasted of oil, metal dust, and sanctified incense pumped through vents by wheezing servitors. Each of us wore rebreathers crusted with grime, the vox grills muffling any word that wasn't a chant or a work command. I remember the rhythm of it all, the clang, the hiss, the human breath breaking between mechanical heartbeats. There was comfort in it once, the dull rhythm of obedience. They said the Emperor heard us through our toil, that every bolt tightened and every component forged was another offering to his undying vigilance. I believed it once with the simple faith of a child reciting catechisms before sleep. But faith is fragile when buried beneath noise. There comes a point when the machinery's roar drowns even your own thoughts, and all that remains is the sound of servitude. The overseers walked among us like silent ghosts in flak robes, their visors reflecting the light of furnaces. Their voices came through vox scramblers, distorted and cold. They never struck us themselves. That was the work of the servo whips, metallic appendages that coiled from the ceiling and lashed without hesitation. The lashes were precise, mathematical, every motion of defiance or fatigue measured and corrected. We were numbers on a data slate, output rates on a cogitator screen, interchangeable flesh powering the Imperium's endless hunger. Once, during a maintenance pause, I found myself staring into the heart of a smelter. The molten glow moved like a living thing, breathing, pulsing with heat. It should have blinded me, but I could not look away. In that moment, the thrum of machinery seemed to fade, replaced by another rhythm, slower, deeper, resonant. It was as though the forge itself had spoken, a whisper that trembled along the edges of my mind. I thought it was fatigue. It must have been. But when I blinked, I saw faces in the flame. Not shapes, not tricks of light, faces, smiling, I told no one. To speak such things was heresy, and heresy in the manufactorum was purged without hesitation. The last man who claimed to hear voices through the vox lines had been taken by the Adeptus Arbits. They said his screams echoed through the corridors for hours, though no one dared to confirm it. After that, silence became our shield. Still, the whispers lingered. I began to hear them even when the machinery drowned everything else. Soft at first, like static. Then clearer, my name spoken as though it were being remembered, not called. Each time I turned, there was nothing but smoke and heat distortion, the glimmer of molten metal reflected in pools of coolant. I tried to pray, repeating the litany of endurance beneath my breath until my throat ached. But the words felt brittle now, hollow as the pipes above us. The days blurred together, indistinguishable, until one evening when the furnaces failed. The sudden silence was unbearable. Without the mechanical heartbeat, the factory felt dead, and in that death something else stirred. The air grew colder, the shadows longer. I could hear the workers around me shifting uneasily, murmuring oaths to the Emperor. Then came a sound, faint, rhythmic, almost musical. It came from the vox grill of an old servitor slumped against the wall, its augmetics corroded, its flesh long since dried. The machine should have been inert, but its mouth moved, whispering something between static bursts. I stepped closer. The words were almost human. "Do you see how they forget you?" it said. "Do you see how he does not answer?" The lights flickered, and for a heartbeat I thought I saw movement beyond the smelters. A figure standing where no walkway existed. Its shape was unclear, its edges soft and shifting, but its eyes burned with the same hue as molten metal. Then the lights returned and the vision vanished. The servitor fell silent. No one else seemed to notice. Perhaps I was mad already. Perhaps that was mercy. Yet as I returned to my station, hands trembling, I realized something had changed. The rhythm of the factory no longer comforted me. Beneath the clang of hammers, I heard a new pattern forming. Not mechanical, but alive. A heartbeat. My own, or something else's, I could not tell. And from that moment on, I began to listen. The days that followed the silence were not days at all, but long stretches of dim yellow light and metallic echo. The furnaces had been repaired, yet the rhythm of the factory had changed. The old pace was gone, replaced by something irregular, almost human in its hesitation. The machines groaned now between cycles as if reluctant to continue, and in those pauses the whispers returned. They were not constant, only fragments caught between the hiss of steam and the grind of gears, but they were enough. Enough to make me listen. Enough to make me afraid. The overseers noticed our unease, though they mistook it for laziness. Punishments multiplied. The servo whips cracked more often, and their lashes burned through cloth into skin. We bore the pain in silence, offering it to the Emperor as sacrifice, or so we told ourselves. Yet deep within, something in me had begun to fracture. Every chant, every rote hymn we recited before the work shift sounded slightly wrong now. Too mechanical, too forced. The syllables no longer lifted toward heaven, but fell heavy into the dust. I tried to sing with conviction, but each word seemed to echo with mockery. It was during one of those forced recitations that I first smelled it. A sweetness that had no place in the factory. Not the stench of oil or metal, but something softer, like fruit left too long in the sun. The scent wove through the incense and smoke, teasing at memory. Almost pleasant, almost holy. I looked around, expecting to see a chemical spill or coolant leak, but the others were too focused on their hymns, their lips moving in perfect unison. The scent lingered a moment longer, then vanished as if drawn into the vents. Yet it left something behind, a strange longing I could not name. That night, as I lay in my bunk, the whispers came again, clearer now. My name repeated not as accusation, but invitation. The voice was soft, layered with tones that didn't belong to a single throat. It sounded male and female at once, ancient and newborn. I pressed my hands to my ears, but the sound did not fade. It was not heard with flesh, but with something deeper. Sleep became impossible. When I did close my eyes, colors bloomed behind my eyelids that did not exist in the mortal spectrum. Hues that felt like music, vibrating through my bones. I awoke sweating, whispering words I didn't understand. The next morning, one of the workers in our sector collapsed. A man named Jorik, who had been on the line beside me for years, known for his piety and silence. He fell without a sound, his tools clattering across the grating. When we lifted him, his eyes were open and shining, but there was no light inside. The medici servitors declared cardiac failure, though none of us believed it. I had seen his face, not the stillness of death, but the peace of one who had seen something vast and merciful. The overseers ordered the body taken away. By the next shift, no trace of him remained. Even his name was erased from the production logs. Rumors spread like oil on water. Some said Jorik had been possessed. Others whispered that he had ascended, taken by the Emperor's will. But I remembered the sweetness in the air, the impossible color, and the voice that spoke in the stillness. None of it felt like the Emperor. None of it felt like light. It was something else, vast and patient, waiting for acknowledgement. During the third cycle after Jorek's disappearance, I found a pattern etched into the underside of my workstation, a symbol, scratched in metal by hand. It was circular, intersected by lines that curved and twisted in ways that hurt the eye to follow. I didn't recognize it, but when I traced it with a gloved finger, warmth spread through my palm, pulsing in rhythm with the factory's heartbeat. It was then that I realized the machine's rhythm had not changed at random. It had become a message, a call and response mechanical liturgy composed by unseen hands. I began to hear meaning in the clatter, as though every piston and hammer sang together in a language just beyond understanding. I told myself it was madness, sleep deprivation, industrial hallucination. Yet even as I tried to reason, I found my hands moving to the rhythm unconsciously, tightening bolts in perfect sync with the pattern. My breath matched the tempo. My heart followed. I had become part of the music, and the music had noticed. That night, when the lights dimmed for rest, I heard the hymn again. Not from human throats, but from the walls themselves. A low, droning chant like the sigh of machinery learning to dream. I stood, trembling, and pressed my ear to the cold metal. The words were there, hidden in the vibration. He does not hear. But we do. The fractures in my faith widened, and through them something luminous and terrible began to seep. The next morning I looked at the Emperor's mural above the furnaces, and for the first time I could not meet his gaze. There was no warmth in those painted eyes, only judgment. Yet somewhere beyond the smoke and steel I could feel another presence watching. Not judging, not demanding, simply waiting. And though I hated myself for it, part of me wanted to answer. The punishment came swiftly, as all punishments in the Imperium do. It began with whispers among the overseers, clipped tones exchanged over vox links, followed by the arrival of the enforcers. Their boots struck the grating like hammers, echoing through the factory's endless corridors. None of us dared to raise our heads, though every worker felt their approach like the creeping shadow of an eclipse. They said a section of our line had fallen behind quota, and the fault, as always, was ours. There were no appeals, no explanations, only the ritual of correction. They chose 3 at random. That was the way of it. No investigation, no accusation, merely selection. I remember their faces more clearly than my own reflection. One was an older woman with the symbol of the Omnissiah burned into her brow. Another, a youth whose hands still trembled from fear of the machines. And the third, Jorek's replacement, a man whose name I never learned. They were dragged to the platform above the smelters, beneath the Emperor's cracked image. The enforcers spoke a single line of scripture before the servo whips struck. The sound was worse than the sight, that wet, meaty rhythm as flesh met steel. The air filled with the scent of blood, sharp and electric, mixing with the promethium haze until it felt as though the whole factory breathed their suffering. The woman's cries were not pleas but hymns, twisted into something almost melodic. The overseers watched in silence, recording the session with hololithic precision. The lesson, they said, was obedience. But as I watched, I felt something else rising in me. Not pity, not rage, but a strange clarity. The lashes fell again, and with each strike, the air seemed to tremble. The machines slowed, their rhythm faltering. The furnaces roared louder as though protesting the act. And then, just for a moment, I thought I saw the blood shimmer as it splashed across the metal floor. Not red, but iridescent, shifting between colors that did not belong in any spectrum known to man. The droplets pulsed like veins of light, seeping into the cracks of the grating, drawn toward the smelter's edge as if called. No one else seemed to notice. Or perhaps they did, but fear had already turned their eyes to stone. When the punishment ended, the overseers ordered the remains removed. The enforcers left without a word. Yet something lingered, a taste in the air, copper and sweet. That night, as we returned to our bunks, I felt the factory hum beneath my feet, a low vibration that climbed through the metal like a living pulse. I couldn't sleep. My skin felt too tight, my breath shallow. I dreamed of the blood again, spreading across the floor like ink on parchment, forming shapes that moved and shifted when I tried to focus. In the dream, I stood before the smelter. The heat did not burn me. It embraced me. From within the molten heart, shapes emerged. Hands, faces, eyes, all woven of liquid fire. They reached toward me not in threat but in invitation. I felt their warmth settle into my bones, and with it came understanding. Not words, but pure sensation. The pain of those who suffered was not meaningless. It was currency. The gods, whoever they were, took note of every drop spilled, every cry offered to the void, and somewhere beyond that veil of heat something listened. When I woke, my hands were shaking and a mark had appeared on my palm. Faint, almost invisible, but there. A scar shaped like the pattern I had found carved beneath my workstation days before. It throbbed softly in time with the factory's rhythm. I scrubbed at it until the skin broke, but it remained, gleaming faintly in the dim light. I hid it beneath my gloves and said nothing. The next cycle, production surged beyond expectation. The overseers praised our renewed devotion, though they could not explain it. Every worker moved with unnatural precision, every motion in harmony with the machines. It was as though we were no longer laborers but extensions of the factory itself, driven by an unseen will. The air shimmered faintly, heatless and alive. Even the servo whips seemed to hesitate, their mechanical arms pausing mid-strike. I realized then that something had changed, not in the machines, but in us. The whispers that had haunted me were louder now, clearer, though still half buried beneath the noise. They spoke of purpose, of strength through pain, of unity and suffering. The words echoed with a kind of terrible beauty. I should have resisted. I should have clung to the Emperor's light. But the truth was, the Emperor had never spoken to me. Not once in all my years of toil and prayer. And now something finally had. By the time the next inspection arrived, I no longer bowed when the ecclesiarchy priest entered. His words were hollow, his blessing mechanical. I watched him sprinkle sanctified oil upon the machines, and I almost laughed. His faith was rote. Mine was awakening. As he turned to leave, his eyes met mine, and in that instant I knew he saw the mark beneath my glove. He faltered, his chant stuttering mid-verse. Then he looked away. He said nothing, but in that silence I understood the truth that had been growing within me all along. Obedience was not virtue. It was the chain that bound us, and somewhere beyond the veil of reality, the ones who had watched me suffer were smiling. Sleep no longer brought me refuge. When my eyelids closed, I no longer drifted into the blank, exhausted dark that had once been my only escape. Instead, a lightless space opened, vast and shifting, its edges pulsing with colors I could not name. In its center, something watched. It had no face, no form, only an endless sense of being perceived, as if my every thought were laid bare and weighed. At first I fought it, clawing at consciousness like a drowning man reaching for air. But the more I resisted, the stronger its gaze became, until even waking offered no reprieve. In the manufactorum, my hands worked as they always had, yet my mind drifted, no longer anchored by ritual or routine. The machine's rhythm was a hymn now, each hammer strike a syllable, each venting hiss a breath. The overseers still stalked the catwalks, but their presence had become irrelevant, their punishments pale echoes compared to what I felt pressing against my skull. Sometimes when I glanced up at the mural of the Emperor above the furnaces, I swore his eyes had changed, no longer hard and judging but cracked open, revealing a deeper void within. It began with visions at the edge of sight, reflections where no polished metal existed, glimpses in the flicker of vent light, a shadow standing among the workers, still as a statue, its outline fluid as smoke. The first time I blinked and it was gone. The second time I watched it fade slowly. Its gaze fixed on me even as it dissolved into the heat shimmer. When it appeared again, I didn't look away. My heart pounded so loudly I could feel it in my fingertips, but I forced myself to hold its gaze. There was no malice in it, only recognition. I began to sense patterns in everything. The hiss of steam valves became whispered syllables. The pulse of the conveyor belts mapped constellations on the backs of my eyelids. Even the pain of my aching hands and shoulders became a kind of language. All of it pointed inward, like arrows converging on a single mark. Me. The notion was absurd, arrogant, perhaps even heretical, but I could not shake it. Something vast had turned its attention to me, and I did not know why. The priest returned one shift later, leading a perfunctory rite of blessing. He spoke the same tired prayers, his voice cracking through the vox amp, but I could see the tremor in his hands. His eyes flicked toward me more than once. He knew. He might not understand, but he knew. When he passed close enough, the scent of sanctified oil burned my nostrils, and beneath it I caught another smell. That same sweet rot, stronger now. It clung to him, a hint of something hiding beneath his robes. His words faltered as our gazes met. For a heartbeat, his lips formed a silent plea. Then he looked away and continued the hymn. That night, as the shift ended, I lingered by the smelter. The other workers trudged off, but I stayed, drawn to the molten heart like an insect to a flame. The heat was unbearable, yet I could not step back. In the glow, I saw it again. The shadowed figure from my visions, now clear and solid, standing on the opposite side of the furnace where no walkway existed. Its form shifted like smoke and muscle, its eyes two burning coals that pulsed in rhythm with my heartbeat. It raised a hand, palm outward, not in threat but in greeting. I should have turned and run. I should have prayed. Instead, I reached out my own hand, though a gulf of molten fire separated us. For a moment, the heat receded and I felt something brush my skin. Not flesh, not air, but presence. 1,000 thoughts flooded my mind at once. Memories I had never lived. Battles fought on worlds whose names I did not know. Screams that were not mine, and above it all, a single impression like a tide pulling me under. It was not a god, not fully. It was a fragment, an echo of something far vaster, an eye peering through a pinhole into the mortal world. The contact lasted no more than a breath, yet when it broke, I staggered backward, gasping as if I'd been drowned. My glove had scorched away, leaving my palm bare. The faint mark etched into my flesh now glowed faintly, pulsing like a second heartbeat. I pressed it to my chest, trembling. Around me, the factory hummed louder than before, its machines swaying as if in worship. I stumbled back to my bunk long after the others had gone, hands still shaking. The whispers had changed. No longer static, no longer a chorus of fragmented words. Now it was a single voice, low and steady, speaking not at me but with me. It asked nothing. It promised nothing. It simply existed, its gaze coiled behind my eyes like a second soul. For the first time, I felt neither fear nor defiance. I felt seen, and in that small, treacherous feeling, the last tether of my old faith frayed. There was no moment of thunder, no lightning strike of revelation. The change began like frost creeping across a window pane, slow and invisible until one day the entire world was different. My hands no longer trembled from exhaustion. They moved with a strength that seemed to come from somewhere beyond my muscles. Each blow of the hammer, each rotation of the wrench felt inevitable, effortless. The aches that had once plagued my back and shoulders vanished. Even hunger dulled, as though some unseen force had begun to nourish me with something deeper than food. The mark on my palm pulsed softly in time with the factory's rhythm. It was no longer faint but etched, the metal itself seeming to react to its glow. At first I hid it under thicker gloves, but hiding it became pointless. It was not only on my skin anymore, but in my eyes, my breath, my gait. The other workers noticed. They did not speak it aloud, but I saw their furtive glances, the quick crossing of themselves with the sign of the Aquila when they passed me. Some avoided me entirely, muttering prayers under their breath. Others were drawn closer as though sensing a warmth they could not name. I told myself these were coincidences, nothing more. But in the quieter hours, when the machines fell silent for maintenance, I could feel it. A current running beneath reality. A pulse like a subterranean river. I had begun to drink from it without meaning to. My prayers to the Emperor, once automatic, now faltered. The words stuck in my throat like dry ash. I would kneel before the mural of his face above the furnaces. But my thoughts strayed to the shadowed figure on the other side of the smelter, to the touch that had burned without burning one night. During the rest cycle, I dreamed again of the molten heart. This time the shadow was closer, its form coalescing into something almost human. Taller than any mortal, its limbs long and sinewed, its skin shifting like liquid metal. It spoke without speaking, a single phrase blooming directly into my mind. All gifts begin in silence. I awoke with the taste of copper on my tongue, and found my mark had changed shape overnight, the lines now spiraling outward like a labyrinth. When I traced them, I felt a low hum beneath my skin, as though a voice were waiting just below the surface, ready to rise. I began to test it without meaning to. Tools grew lighter in my hands. I could anticipate malfunctions seconds before they occurred, stepping back just as a pipe burst or a servo arm misfired. Once, a servo whip lashed out at me for working too slowly, but instead of striking, it froze midair, its mechanism jammed. The overseer barked at the machine, but it refused to move until I stepped away. When it finally recoiled, there was a hush among the workers. No sound but the hiss of steam and their collective breath. It was after that incident that others began to approach me in secret. At first only a few, a woman with burns on her arms, a young man who had lost 3 fingers to the assembly line. They came not with questions, but with confessions. They too had seen shapes in the furnaces, heard whispers in the hiss of steam. Some bore marks like mine hidden beneath their work cloths. I listened, said nothing, and felt the current between us grow stronger. We began to meet during the dead hours when the overseers were absent and the machines slept. We spoke not of rebellion but of revelation, trading our visions like contraband. The sweetness in the air was stronger in these moments, filling our lungs like incense, though no incense burned. We knelt not before the Aquila, but before a blank stretch of wall where the heat shimmered faintly. It was not worship yet, not truly. It was hunger. The priest still came, muttering his prayers, but he avoided our eyes now. He knew, perhaps he had known all along. When he blessed the machines, his voice faltered. When he raised the icon of the Emperor, his hand trembled. Once, as he passed me, he whispered a single word too low for the overseers to hear. Stop. But the word had no meaning anymore. I could not stop. None of us could. The mark on my palm burned like a coal as I lay in my bunk listening to the breaths of those around me. They shifted in their sleep, murmuring fragments of strange liturgies. Even their dreams had begun to change. We were no longer merely workers. We were something else, something still forming. In the darkness, the voice returned, low and steady, threaded with a terrible gentleness. You have already begun to change. Do not fear the gift. It has always been yours. I closed my eyes, and for the first time I did not dream of the Emperor at all. The first fire began by accident, or so the overseers would later claim. A faulty coolant valve, they said, a pressure failure in the lower line. But I was there. I saw it begin, a spark that lingered longer than it should, blooming not from friction but from intention. The flames licked the steel like curious tongues, spreading along the assembly belts faster than physics should have allowed. The alarms screamed in discordant harmony, their wails echoing through the manufactorum like the birth cries of something vast and alive. The workers scattered, some praying, others running, their voices drowned by the roar of combustion. I stood still, frozen by awe. The heat washed over me, searing but not consuming. Through the inferno I saw shapes moving. Not people, not shadows, but silhouettes that danced within the flame itself. They twisted and coiled, beautiful and grotesque, their forms shifting between bodies and symbols. Around me, others stopped fleeing. They turned toward the fire, eyes wide as though recognizing something they had been waiting for all their lives. Some fell to their knees, mouths open in silent prayer. Others laughed, not from madness but from release. The overseers' voices barked over the vox, commanding evacuation, but the words dissolved into static. Even the servo whips faltered, their movements erratic as though the machines themselves hesitated. The heat had a rhythm now, a pulse that throbbed through the steel, and beneath it I heard the voice again, no longer a whisper but a command. Feed it. Without thinking, I obeyed. I reached for the storage barrels of promethium, tipping one onto the floor. The liquid spilled out like quicksilver, catching the light. Others followed suit. No one spoke. We moved as one. The flames devoured the fuel greedily, climbing the walls, curling around the iron pillars like vines around a shrine. The mural of the Emperor blackened, his painted eyes melting into dark streaks that ran down his face like tears. For the first time, his gaze seemed to look away. The smoke rose thick and sweet, filling the lungs with a taste that was almost intoxicating. It should have suffocated us, but instead it felt like breath after drowning. I felt my heart racing, my vision blurring. The mark on my palm glowed white-hot, and from the corners of my sight I saw the others, my fellow workers, their skin glistening with sweat that shimmered faintly as if reflecting light that wasn't there. The whispers that once came singly now formed a chorus, resonating from the very air. It was not language anymore, but harmony. Somewhere above, the alarms died. The enforcers never came. Perhaps they were dead, perhaps they fled, and it did not matter. The fire was our liturgy now. We moved through it like dancers, unharmed though the flames caressed our skin. The walls groaned as the supports began to warp. Molten metal dripped like candle wax, forming strange runes in the floor grating. They pulsed faintly, matching the beat that thrummed in my bones. I found myself standing at the heart of it all, the others circling me in reverent silence. Their faces were streaked with soot and ash, their eyes fever-bright. Someone began to hum, a low sound that trembled through the smoke, and soon the rest joined in. It was not one of the Emperor's hymns. It was older, wordless, primal. I felt it reverberate through the walls, through my spine, through the mark that had branded me. The voice, the one that had haunted my dreams, spoke once more, but this time it did not speak to me. It spoke through me. From the ashes I heard myself say, "We rise not in servitude but in flame." The words were not mine, but my lips formed them. My breath gave them life. The others answered in unison, voices blending into a single roar. "In flame," they cried, "and we are made pure." The ceiling split then, a fracture running through the metal like lightning. For a moment I thought the sky itself had torn open. Through it poured not air but light, sickly golden red, too brilliant to be holy. The fire surged higher, drawn toward it like water to a drain, and from within that light I glimpsed movement, a shadow vast as a cathedral unfolding in slow majesty. Its form was too great to comprehend, its edges shifting between flesh and void. I fell to my knees, not from fear but from awe so complete it hollowed me out. Around me the others screamed, not in pain but in ecstasy. Their voices melded with the roar of the flames until the two were indistinguishable. The fire no longer burned, it sang. Each body became a note, each death a verse. And within that song I heard laughter, deep, echoing, loving. The kind of laughter that promised everything and demanded everything in return. When consciousness returned, the fire was gone. The manufactorum was nothing but ruin, melted steel, charred remains, the faint crackle of cooling metal. The air shimmered faintly, still alive with unseen heat. I stood alone amid the ashes, my clothes untouched, my mark still burning bright. The others were gone. Whether consumed or transformed, I could not say, but I knew they had not died in vain. The fire had not been destruction. It had been revelation. I looked upon the ruin and felt no grief, only hunger. I turned toward the smoldering mural of the Emperor, now barely visible beneath soot and ash. I reached out, pressed my glowing palm against his face and whispered to the silence that had replaced his light. "Your throne burns quietly, Father. But we have found another." In the days that followed the fire, silence claimed the manufactorum. The air, once heavy with smoke and machinery, now hung still, thick with the metallic tang of cooling ruin. The overseers were gone. The priest's corpse hung from the catwalk, his eyes glassy, his hands clutching the scorched remnants of a purity seal that had burned black, and we, the ones who remained, stood among the ashes like ghosts, our faces pale and luminous beneath the embers' glow. The fire had spared us, and in that mercy, we found our conviction. The mark on my palm no longer pulsed faintly. It beat like a heart of its own. Through it I could feel the others, their breaths synchronizing, their thoughts brushing against mine in wordless communion. There was no leader now, no need for command. We were bound by something stronger than discipline, deeper than fear. We were chosen. Word of the fire spread across the hab blocks. Rumors whispered through the corridors that the Emperor's wrath had struck the factory, that heretics had burned in his name. But those who came to see the wreckage did not find charred bodies or wrecked machines. They found order in ruin, symbols etched into the metal, perfect concentric circles carved by heat. The Adeptus Arbits arrived days later, flanked by Skitarii patrols, and what they saw was enough to shake their certainty. None spoke of it afterward. None who entered the ruins returned. We left that night. The city's underhive stretched for kilometers, an endless maze of rust and smoke. We moved through it like shadows, guided not by light but by instinct. The whispers that had haunted me were now a chorus, clear and purposeful. They spoke of movement, of spreading, of war, and though none of us had ever held a weapon, our hands itched for one. The fire had not consumed us. It had tempered us. At first we were only a dozen. Then a dozen more joined. Some came from other manufactura, drawn by dreams they could not explain. Others were deserters from the Astra Militarum, hollow-eyed and trembling, their oaths burned away by disillusion. Each bore some mark, a scar, a glow, a whisper they could not silence. They recognized us as kin. We gathered in a forgotten tunnel deep beneath the city's bones. The walls were slick with condensation, the air cold enough to bite. There we built our altar, not from gold or marble, but from twisted metal and blood. Upon it we placed relics of the old world, a cracked aquila, a melted purity seal, the scorched vox unit of the priest who had once told me to stop. They became offerings not to the Emperor, but to the new light that had revealed itself through flame and pain. That night, as we knelt before the altar, the air began to move. slowly at first, then with gathering strength. It swirled around us, carrying with it the scent of ash and iron. The whispers grew until they became voices, distinct and yet joined, speaking in unity. "The old gods are blind," they said. "The new ones watch through you." I felt my body tremble, every nerve alight. My vision blurred, and through the haze I saw them, the faces of my brothers and sisters glowing faintly from within, their skin etched with lines of molten light. We had become vessels. The first Skitarii patrol found us 3 days later. They came with mechanical precision, their voxcasters blaring warnings of heresy and death. But when they entered the tunnel, they hesitated. The air shimmered, their augmetic lenses flickering. We did not attack. We only stood watching. The first to fire was their alpha. His shot went wide, striking the ceiling and showering sparks over us. I remember raising my hand, not in defense but in invitation. The mark on my palm flared, and for an instant, I felt a heat greater than any forge. The Skitarii convulsed as their armor glowed red-hot. The metal groaned, their mechanical limbs twisting like wax. They screamed, and the sound was music. When it ended, nothing remained but slag and silence. The others turned to me, their faces full of awe. They did not bow. They did not speak. But in their gaze, I saw the truth. I had become the voice of what now guided us. We left the tunnel soon after. The surface awaited, the dying city under a rusted sky, its towers crumbling beneath the weight of centuries. The Vox lines carried word of uprising, small and scattered, spreading like infection through the hives. We marched toward the sound of distant gunfire, our feet steady, our breaths in unison. Behind us, the air shimmered faintly, as though the warp itself trailed our steps. I no longer knew where the line between flesh and spirit lay. My thoughts were my own, yet not entirely. My heart beat, yet it did so in time with something vast and unseen. As we emerged into the light of the surface, the sky burned red with dust and fire. In that moment, I understood that the fire in the Manufactorum had only been the beginning. The true conflagration was coming, a storm not of promethium and steel, but of faith and revelation. We were not soldiers. We were a promise. And promises, once spoken by the warp, are never taken back. The city above had already begun to rot long before our flames touched it. The spires were hollow, their windows dark. The banners of the Imperial Creed tattered and motionless in the stagnant air. The people moved like shadows beneath them, gaunt, desperate, broken by ration lines and sermons that no longer stirred the soul. Yet when we emerged from the underhive, something in them shifted. They did not see heretics. They saw survivors, and in their weary eyes I glimpsed the hunger that once lived in mine, the hunger for meaning, for something that breathed. We did not march with weapons raised. We walked among them as pilgrims, our robes still streaked with ash, our eyes reflecting the dull red of the dawn. At first they avoided us. Then they began to follow. It started with a child clutching a shard of metal shaped like a wing. He fell into step behind me, his small voice whispering one of the old hymns, broken and misremembered. Others joined, mothers, workers, scavengers, until the streets filled with a slow, deliberate procession. The sound of our footsteps was like a heartbeat pulsing through the dust. The priests tried to intervene. They came out from their shrines with censers swinging, their voices quivering as they recited verses about loyalty and penance. But when they looked upon us, their words faltered. Some fell silent mid-prayer, eyes wide with something between awe and dread. Others fled, leaving their holy texts trampled in the street. The people began to whisper that the Emperor's angels had returned, not from the sky but from the ashes. We did not correct them. Truth had long ceased to matter. Only belief remained. Each night as we rested among the ruins, I dreamt of the same vision. A figure of light standing upon a mountain of ash, its wings vast and shifting. It spoke no words, yet its gaze filled me with unbearable certainty. When I awoke, I found the others already waiting, their eyes reflecting the same dream. We did not question it. The mark upon my hand burned hotter with every passing day, and I knew that whatever moved through us had purpose. The first miracle came in the 6th night. One of the followers, a man whose lungs had been rotted by chemical dust, fell to his knees, coughing blood. His wife screamed, clutching him as he convulsed. I reached for him instinctively, pressing my marked hand against his chest. The glow that followed was faint, like the last ember of a dying flame. Then his breath steadied. The color returned to his skin. When he opened his eyes, they shone with the same inner light that burned within us. The crowd fell to silence. Then as one, they began to kneel. Word spread faster than any vox could carry. The next day, dozens arrived. The day after, hundreds. They called us the Hollow Saints, vessels emptied of sin, walking proof that the Emperor's silence could be filled again. They built shrines where we passed, crude structures of bone and scrap metal adorned with the sigil that had begun to form on my palm. I did not tell them what it was. I let them believe it was his sign, for faith, even misplaced, has power, but power draws attention. The Adeptus Arbits arrived first, then detachments of the local PDF. Their leaders stood before our growing congregation, vox grills crackling as they demanded our surrender. Their armor gleamed beneath the rusted sky, immaculate against the filth of the streets, yet their voices trembled. Behind their mirrored visors, they saw the faces of their own kin among us, brothers, sisters, parents. The line between order and devotion wavered. When they fired, it was not out of hatred but fear. The first shot tore through the crowd and chaos erupted. I remember the sound of last fire, the scent of scorched flesh, the cries of the dying. Yet amidst the slaughter I felt no terror, only the weight of inevitability. The mark upon my hand flared again and I raised it toward the soldiers. The air thickened, the sound warped. Light burst outward, soundless and absolute. When it faded, the soldiers stood frozen. Their armor had turned to ash, their weapons melted into their hands. They toppled one by one, like statues collapsing under their own weight. The silence that followed was not grief. It was awe. The people fell to their knees again, chanting the same phrase in rhythm. From ash, life. From silence, song. That night I sat alone beneath the ruined statue of the Emperor, the moonlight cutting across his cracked face. The wind carried faint whispers, not from the warp, but from memory. For a moment I felt the weight of what I had done. The faces of the dead lingered before my eyes, their voices asking questions I could no longer answer. Was this salvation, or desecration wearing its mask? But the whispers returned, gentle this time, like the promise of sleep. They spoke not of guilt, but of purpose. The galaxy was vast, they said, and beyond this city countless others waited, silent and hollow, ready to burn anew. When dawn came, we marched again. The people followed in greater numbers, their voices rising with ours. The city's vox towers crackled with broken hymns, fragments of our chant bleeding through imperial transmissions. Somewhere far above, I imagined the priests of Terra listening, horrified, unable to silence the signal. The Emperor had his saints. Now so did we, and ours were hollow, but they sang. Sleep no longer brought rest. When my eyes closed, I walked through worlds that were not mine. Fields of molten glass, seas of crimson light, cathedrals built from bones that pulsed like veins. The air there hummed with impossible harmonies, and in the distance, titans of light and shadow fought in silence, their movements bending the sky. Sometimes I thought I could hear them whispering my name, not as it was, but as something rewritten, a sound that belonged to both flesh and flame. Each dawn I awoke trembling, the taste of iron on my tongue, the mark upon my palm glowing faintly even before I stirred. The war began without warning. Reports came through the vox of uprisings across the sector. Manufactura seized, cathedra burned, whole regiments of the Astra Militarum vanishing into the underhive. What began as whispers had become contagion. Each world that heard our hymn took it as their own. I could feel it faintly like a pulse echoing through the void. We were connected, bound by something greater than speech. I did not know their faces, yet I could sense their exultation, their terror, their need. The Hollow Saints had multiplied. The Imperium struck back, as it always does, with fire and decree. Orbital bombardments erased cities where our symbols had appeared. The Adeptus Sororitas descended in their burning ships, their hymns of purity shaking the air. I saw their lights in the sky one morning, descending like falling stars. The people cheered, thinking salvation had come. Then the bombardments began. The streets ran black with soot and blood. And yet, amidst the destruction, something impossible occurred. The flames bent. The fire did not consume us. It curved away, twisting through the air as though denied its hunger. The faithful fell to their knees, their tears glowing faintly as they chanted through the smoke. I watched it all unfold from the steps of a ruined shrine. For the first time, I understood that I was no longer merely human. The whispers within me had grown louder. Their voices layered upon one another until I could no longer distinguish where I ended and they began. The boundaries of self were dissolving, replaced by a unity that felt both sacred and terrifying. They began calling me Prophet of the Ashen Path. I did not claim the title. It claimed me. Each night I was pulled deeper into the dreams. I saw glimpses of what lay beyond the veil, vast architectures of will and hunger, entities so immense that to comprehend them was to unravel. Yet among them one shape lingered closer than the rest, watching. Its gaze felt ancient, intimate, patient. It did not demand, it waited. And somewhere in that gaze I sensed affection, or perhaps recognition. Rumors began to spread among the faithful that the Emperor himself had turned his eyes upon us, that he was testing us through trial and flame, remaking his servants into something new. The priests who survived the first purges adopted our symbols, claiming to have seen visions of the throne itself cracking, golden light leaking through. They said the master of mankind was stirring at last and that the fire we bore was the herald of his awakening. I knew better, but I did not correct them. Faith, once freed from its cage, is a weapon sharper than any blade. It did not matter who they believed we served, only that they believed. When the Imperial Guard returned, they brought with them armor and artillery from orbit, sanctioned by decree of the Ecclesiarchy. The city became a war zone. Promethium shells turned entire districts into molten slag, yet our people marched through it unharmed, their bodies wreathed in shimmering heat. They did not flinch, they sang. Each note fractured the air, resonating with a pitch that made steel shiver. The enemy faltered, unsure whether they faced mortals or ghosts. The dreams began to bleed into waking life. Shapes flickered in the corners of vision, silhouettes of light moving with impossible grace. At first I thought them hallucinations, but others saw them too. They walked among us in silence, their forms shifting like smoke. The people bowed as they passed, calling them angels of the new flame. Some swore the ground bloomed with ash-white flowers where they stepped. I never touched them, but sometimes when I closed my eyes I could feel their presence inside my mind, guiding my words, steering the current of faith that surged around us. The war spread beyond the city. Vox reports spoke of other worlds in the subsector falling silent. Pilgrim fleets vanished into the warp, their last transmissions filled with laughter and hymns not found in any imperial lexicon. The Adeptus Mechanicus declared the phenomena data corruption of spiritual nature. The Ordos Hereticus called it the Flame Plague. But among us it was known simply as the Dreaming War, a conflict fought not only in the material realm but in the soul itself. At times I wondered whether the Emperor could hear us. Whether he sat upon his golden throne watching, unable to speak. Whether our hymn, our defiance, reached him as blasphemy or as mercy. The thought lingered like a wound that refused to heal. The sky above the city turned the color of dried blood. The warp storms that once haunted only the distant edges of the sector now pulsed visibly across the horizon. The air was thick with static and scent of ozone. The Vox sang continuously, a low, unending hum of voices that were not entirely human. And then one night the dreams changed. The voice that had guided me since the fire grew silent. In its place came a void, a terrible infinite quiet. The unity I had felt began to fray. The others grew restless, their chants dissonant. Some wept, claiming the flame had abandoned them. Others turned on each other, whispering accusations of betrayal. The faith that had bound us was beginning to fracture. I looked to the sky, to the crimson storms that raged across the void, and for the first time since the fire I felt fear. Something was coming. Not salvation, not damnation, something older, and it was hungry. The silence endured for 7 days. No whispers, no visions, no dreamlight bleeding through the walls of sleep. For the first time since the fire I was alone within my own mind, and it felt like drowning in air. The followers wandered through the ruins in confusion, their chants faltering into broken murmurs. The air grew heavy, the sky dimmed to the color of smoke, and every sound seemed swallowed by a great distance. I walked among them and saw the hollow look that once haunted the manufactorum. That same emptiness we had fled now returned, deeper and colder. The fire that had once burned through us was fading, and with it the certainty that had bound us together. On the 8th day the ground began to tremble. Not from bombardment this time, but from something moving beneath the earth, something vast and slow. The air filled with a low, resonant hum, A vibration felt more than heard. The mark on my hand flared with unbearable heat, and I fell to my knees, pressing it against the scorched ground. Beneath the layers of ash and steel, I felt movement, like a heart awakening beneath the surface of the world. The others gathered around me, their eyes wide with a mingling of awe and terror. They could feel it too. The pulse that had once lived within us now radiated from the earth itself. And then it came. The ground split open in a line of molten light, stretching from the ruins of the cathedral to the horizon. The air burned with colors that should not exist, hues that made the mind ache. The people fell to the ground, weeping, praying, screaming. From within the rift rose a shape, immense and shrouded, formed of smoke and memory. Its outline shifted, wings, arms, a crown of flame, always changing, always impossible. It bore no face, yet when it turned toward me, I felt its gaze pierce through flesh and bone. Every thought I had ever hidden lay bare beneath its scrutiny. Every sin, every act of devotion, every doubt. It spoke not in words, but in a tide of meaning that crashed through my mind. Images flooded me, stars collapsing, worlds reborn, the Emperor's throne flickering like a candle in a storm. I saw the Astronomicon falter, its light trembling against a sea of darkness. And through it all, I heard the echoes of the same hymn we had once sung in the depths of the Manufactorum. Not as rebellion, but as prayer. I understood then that what we had summoned was not salvation nor curse, but reflection. The thing before me was born from us, from our faith, our pain, our need to believe that something beyond the void still listened. It was the warp's answer to the silence of the throne, a mirror made from the ashes of our prayers. The others did not understand. They fell before the apparition, crying out names that no tongue should shape. Some tore at their flesh in ecstasy. Others turned their weapons upon themselves, convinced they had seen the face of divinity. I stood in the center of it all, my body trembling as the rift's light enveloped us. The voice that had been silent for 7 days returned at last, softer than before, a whisper threaded with sorrow. "You have built what could not endure," it said. "But from ruin something greater may yet rise." I asked, though my voice barely formed, if this was the end. It did not answer. It only reached out, its shape dissolving into threads of fire that coiled around my body like smoke. I felt the heat sink into my skin, into my blood, until my veins glowed with the same impossible light. The ground beneath us convulsed, swallowing the last of the followers who had not fled. The rift widened, consuming the ruins, the shrines, the very stones of the city, and then stillness. When I awoke, the sky was pale, washed clean of smoke. The city was gone, buried beneath a plain of glass and ash that stretched to the horizon. I was alone. The mark on my hand had vanished, replaced by a faint scar like a burn long healed. For the first time in what felt like centuries, the air was silent, no whispers, no hymns, only the soft hiss of wind across the dead earth. I walked until the sun set, though there was no sun, only the dull glow of a red sky fading into black. I thought of the Emperor upon his throne, of the flickering light that guided ships across the void. I wondered if he had noticed the fire that had burned here, or if it was too small to reach his dying gaze. Perhaps he had turned away long ago, and in doing so, left the galaxy to dream its own gods. At the edge of what had once been the city, I found the broken half of the mural, the Emperor's face, cracked and blackened but still faintly visible beneath the soot. I sat before it, staring into his blind eyes, and for the first time I prayed. Not for forgiveness, not for power, but for understanding. As the wind moved through the ruins, it carried with it the faintest sound, a hum almost lost to distance. For a moment I thought it was the echo of the old hymn, rising once more from somewhere deep below. Or perhaps it was only the wind, whispering through what remained of the world. I closed my eyes and listened, and though no light appeared, I thought, for a heartbeat, that I heard something answer. Then it was gone. The last light beneath the ash faded into silence, and the long night of the galaxy continued, vast and unbroken. But somewhere deep within that darkness, a spark endured, and that was enough. The wind did not stop. It scoured the glass plain where the city had once stood, singing a low and constant dirge that filled the silence left behind. I wandered through it for days, or what passed for days in this hollow light, measuring time only by the slow cooling of the ground beneath my feet. The air was dry, lifeless yet faintly sweet, as though the ashes themselves still remembered the hymns once sung here. There were no stars, only the dim red glow of the distant sun blurred by dust and memory. I found the bones of the old manufactorum buried halfway beneath a dune of fused sand and slag. Its towers were melted into crooked spires, pointing accusingly toward the heavens. The corridors were gone, but fragments of the walls remained, etched with the same sigil that had marked our rise, the curling flame that once defined us. I traced it with my fingers, expecting the warmth that used to answer, but there was nothing. Only the cold of dead stone. I thought I had been the last until I heard the voice. It came faint and broken through the static of a shattered Vox unit buried in the debris. A woman's voice singing, a hymn of the old faith or something that only resembled it. I dug until my hands bled, uncovering the remnants of a portable transmitter still faintly alive with power. The signal was weak, distant, distorted by the storm, but it was real. Somewhere beyond this wasteland, someone was still alive. I followed the sound. Each step felt heavier, each breath filled with the taste of burnt iron. I passed through what had once been the outskirts, now a graveyard of melted vehicles and half-buried skulls. The hymn grew clearer as I walked, echoing between the dunes of ash. At last I saw the light, a single campfire burning at the edge of the plain, its glow fragile and gold against the endless gray. A figure sat beside it, wrapped in tattered robes, her face hidden behind a cracked respirator mask. She did not startle when I approached. She only looked up as though she had been waiting. The firelight caught in her eyes, not glowing with warp's flame, but soft, human, weary. I thought I was alone, I said. She tilted her head slightly. None of us are ever truly alone, she replied, her voice rasping but steady. You're one of them, aren't you? The ones from the city, I hesitated. I was. She nodded slowly, stirring the fire with a piece of metal shaped like a broken aquila. It burned for weeks, she said. The light reached the outer hives. Some called it a curse, others a sign. They sent ships to see what happened, but none returned. The storm swallowed them. We sat in silence for a time, listening to the wind. The fire cracked, sending sparks into the air that died before they could rise. Do you still hear it? She asked quietly. I shook my head. No, the voices are gone. The flame is gone. Only echoes remain. She studied me for a long moment. Then she lifted her hand and pulled away the mask. Her face was scarred, her skin lined with burns, but her eyes were clear, and on her palm, faint but visible, was the same sigil that had once marked mine. The flame doesn't die, she said. It changes its shape. Her words struck something deep inside me, not the old faith, but something quieter, humbler. She offered me a piece of dried ration, and I took it, the first real food I'd tasted in what felt like centuries. We shared it in silence. Above us, the storm began to thin, revealing a sliver of dark sky where, for the first time in a long while, a single star shone through. I realized then that what we had done, all the fire, the ruin, the false holiness, had not been for nothing. The galaxy would not remember our names, nor the city we burned, but somewhere, someone would carry the ember forward. Perhaps not in worship, but in the simple act of remembering that light can be born even in silence. As the wind died down, I looked at the woman across the fire. What now? I asked. She smiled faintly, her eyes reflecting the star above. We walk, she said. There are others, scattered, lost. They need to know that something still burns. I stared into the fire until the flames blurred into shapes, wings, faces, memories. I thought of the Emperor, the throne, the warp's endless hunger. For the first time, none of it frightened me. The cosmos could keep its gods and its wars. What remained here between two broken souls and a dying fire was enough. When dawn came, we buried the Vox unit in the ash and began to walk toward the horizon. Behind us, the fire dimmed, but the sky, for a moment, brightened. The single star above us shone stronger, its light bending faintly as if caught by unseen hands. Maybe it was only illusion. Maybe it was something more. I did not look back. The age of flame had ended. But somewhere beyond the reach of ruin, in the heart of all that still lived, the echo endured. Faint, human, unholy, and alive. And that too was a kind of faith.